think we live. I think we live. Let me get myself situated and we can do this real quick. We can do this real quick. Let me see. All right. I'm gonna go ahead and get started because I'm on a little bit of a time crunch, so I want to make sure I get the things that I want to talk about for this particular stream out there. First things first, yesterday I was supposed to stream and I couldn't because of a family matter. My youngest son is sick, so it's really not that effective doing a stream when you have a crying kid on your lap. So unfortunately, I couldn't stream the time that I wanted to. By the time he got settled, I thought it was just a little too late to do a stream. So I had to move it forward to the next day, which has led me to here. Pardon me. Still trying to get over this sore throat. But yeah, I wanted to get this information out because I wanted to talk about it. And it's funny, since yesterday, we've had a lot of updates on Wowhead about Season of Discovery. We got a lot of information. We got some new tools that I'm going to talk about. So I do want to incorporate some of that stuff in today's stream. And I feel like it's early enough in the day that even if you don't catch it on the live, you can catch it on the watch back. So I do wanna make note of that. So without further ado, now we got that intro stuff out the way, let's talk about Season of Discovery. We're gonna get to the rage tanks. We're gonna do all this stuff. So on my screen here, I have Crix's interview that I watched a couple of days ago. Basically, just going over all the stuff that he asked. He asked a little bit about Wrath, Kata, Hardcore, and Season of Discovery. This is kind of where we got a lot of important information from, so shout out to Crix for that, because he really did ask some pretty good questions, and it seems like it was kind of on the fly. Like, I don't know, sometimes when we get like Q&As, the Q&As that I be seeing just have a lot of like just nonsense information, like, or nonsense questions, just like, what do you think about the atmosphere of the weather change now, and how does it affect the going to the future? Like, bro, like maybe someone cares about that. I know I personally don't, and I don't need to see it. But Crix was pretty effective in his questioning, so I like it. Um, some important things I want to highlight from Crix's interview was the runes being soulbound, and they'll be usable they'll be usable items that teach you the rune when used. So that means once you learn it, you learn it. Like, you don't have to worry about rediscovering it. Uh, there'll be hundreds of discoveries because each rune needs to be able to be found no matter what starting zone you're in. The same rune might not be discovered in the same way for a gnome mage compared to an undead mage, which just makes sense, right? Like, to have this whole rune system and then to make it like every single mage goes to the same spot to get the rune doesn't really make sense to me. So I do like that change. We got the phases figured out. So in phase 1, Season of Discovery will have 12 runes per class. Future phases will introduce more, and that's kind of what you see on the Wowhead and what I'm actually going to show you in a little bit here. So we got that information. So the 12 runes we did see in the demo ended up being the runes that were going to be effective for our phase when this releases in about 2 weeks or so, 2-3 weeks. The idea of class runes was a group effort. A lot of brainstorming was put in the system. So when he asked this question, when he asked like what was the inspiration on doing the runes, I'm gonna be real. I was watching it and I put in the comments, there's no way that Blizzard brainstormed their way to runes without somebody in that brainstorming team having not played like Project Ascension, because the rune system, if you play Project Ascension, it's basically it's WoW. It's on the WoW server, so I think they're doing TBC right now. But it's a WoW private server that has a lot of customization from those developers, right? So the rune system, if you have played it, the rune system to me really was just like, I don't want to say watered down, but like a easier version of the RE system, the random enchant system that Project Ascension has. And if you play Ascension and then come back to Season Discovery and you'll see the correlation. I can't show it obviously on stream here, but yeah, I feel like somebody in that brainstorming session played Project Ascension and thought a easier, a more digestible way to implement the random enchant system. And I think runes kind of work, to be quite honest with you. What else did we get that I thought was important? So here, right here, let's highlight all tanks will be competitive, including Warlock, Shaman, and Rogue. They will excel at different things, but all will be able to maintain. That was pretty interesting to me because I actually had a discussion with one of my friends who's planning on playing Season Discovery with me, and we kind of have differing opinions on how, like, what kind of content we're gonna get. So basically, it's like at endgame. At level 60, he seems to think that we're gonna get like the regular Molten Core and Nixia's Lair. What else came out? Zul'Gurub, things like the regular raids that people are used to. And I said, I feel like they probably wouldn't go down that line. Not tit for tat. Like maybe we'll get a Molten Core because it's pretty iconic. I mean, all the vanilla classes, all the vanilla raids are iconic, but we'll probably get a Molten Core because that's an easy introduction. It's a pretty easy raid. But the first thought I thought about was, how do you do Molten Core as a Warlock tank with Searing Pain being your main threat generator if everything's immune to fire damage, right? That was the first thought I thought about. So I was like, I don't know. They would have to change it, which I'm not saying they couldn't change it. Obviously, they could either change the raid or they could just change the ability. Just make it do either shadow damage or just a different school of damage, and then bam, there you have it. But that was like just the first iteration. Like, yo, you couldn't Warlock tank. If 90% of the mobs that you're tanking is immune to fire damage, you can't use your main threat generator. So that's kind of what planted the seed of maybe they won't go the exact route of, all right, guys, the level 60 level band is here. Now you're just going to get classic in and of itself after we just did, 50 previous levels of all new stuff. Like Blackrock Depths wasn't a raid in vanilla. And I'm pretty sure it was teased. I'm pretty sure we're going to get a 10-man version or maybe even a 20-man version of Scarlet Monastery, of the Karazhan Crypts, of Nomergon, of Skolamance, of Strathome. So I feel like to put all this effort and time into revamping old stuff to make it, relevant for Season of Discovery, just to turn around and go back to the traditional Molten Core, Nixia's Lair, Blackwing Lair. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of moving backwards, but only time will tell. And I think that was it. Oh, here we go. This is something I kind of overlooked. Some classes might have the same discovery but get different runes. 2 healers might solve the same problem but receive different rewards. That also makes sense. Like I said, you kind of got to shake it up a little bit when it comes to rune discovery. But you can go on right ahead and see this for yourself. I don't want to read this tit for tat. Like, you can go on this, see it for yourself. I want to get to what I'm actually here to talk about, and that is the the warrior and druid things. So actually, I have a clip right here. Boom. All right. Proto Locos, what's up? Thank you for joining. Ooh. Maybe there's going to be a rune to change. No, you're right about that. You're absolutely right. They could do whatever they want. They could change Searing Pain. They can make a rune that makes it do a different school of damage. You're absolutely right. Like, there's many ways to overcome that small oversight. You know what I mean? So there's many ways to do that. But that was just the first thing that I thought about. Like, if I'm planning to main Warlock tank, which I kind of am at this point, I'm debating Warlock and Shaman. I'm leaning more towards Warlock. But if I'm planning to main a Warlock tank, how would I tank Molten Core if nothing has changed? Which there's like a 70-30% chance that nothing gets changed. 70 means like something's gonna get changed. So, but I don't know why I have Warlock here selected because we're not talking about you today. You had your episode. All right, warrior. Here we go. All right, so also new on the Wowhead thing is they have the Season of Discovery runes talents. So you can actually select the slot, select the rune that you want, and you can kind of do a little build here before you get to it in game, which is very useful because if you saw on my previous 2 streams, I had like one tab open with the list of the runes and then one tab with the class talent trees. Like, this just makes my life that much easier. So I appreciate either Wowhead or Blizzard or whoever for that. So there we go. So for Warrior is in a weird spot because Warrior was already strong in vanilla, right? Warrior was already the main tank, the off tank, the threat tank if you're Fury Prod. So Warrior, I kind of feel like Warrior was they walked on eggshells when trying to implement things for Warrior because in my opinion, when I start doing the runes, most of the runes aren't super overpowered. They just bring a lot of quality of life to the warrior. So let's start. So going into the chest slot, we have the choice of Blood Frenzy, Flagellation, Raging Blow, and Warbringer. Clearly, if you're a prot tank, you would take probably, I mean, even if you're a Fury prot, you would take Warbringer. You might want to take Blood Frenzy, but just for the added threat. But Fury prot already did so much threat in previous iterations of Vanilla. I don't know if you need any one of these other ones, but just to push damage, just to push more threat, because now that other people have different tools, you might need one of these new tools to push threat as a Fury prot. So I don't want to say that none of the, like, you're only going to use Warbringer, but I would say probably the most impactful for warriors all around, no matter if you're prot, Fury, arms, whatever have you, is probably Warbringer. Being able to charge, intercept, intervene in combat in any stance is really, really big. I'm surprised that the Warbringer doesn't remove the rage cost, because it costs rage to use intercept, but you generate rage using taunt. So I feel like, why would you ever use intercept at all if you can charge, get your rage, and it's usable in any stance? You don't have to switch to berserker stance, right? So that's kind of weird, maybe a little bit of an oversight, but I feel like this is the best quality of life for your chest, but I feel like the chest runes are pretty interchangeable, I'll say, especially depending on what you're doing. If you're a Fury prot, you're probably looking more closely at like Raging Blow or Blood Frenzy or even Flagellation. But for a deep prot, you're probably looking at Warbringer. Maybe even Flagellation, because all you have to do is activate Blood Rage and you get a 25% physical. So yeah, the chest slot is pretty interchangeable. Like, I had asked, because I didn't raid in vanilla, so I had asked a lot of people from Discord, from people who I play with now who raided all through vanilla, how often was a warrior moving that you actually even need Warbringer? Because Warbringer is great quality of life, especially when you're leveling. But if you're not having to move too often, doesn't really matter if you can charge in combat. If all I got to do is taunt the boss, stand right here, and that's it, and maybe even move to the left a little bit, to the right a little bit. Like, if I'm main tanking, do I really need Warbringer? So, like, I think of fights like the second fight in Blackwing Lair, the Red Dragon Velistraz. He doesn't move, so Warbringer really wouldn't help you there. That's a fight where you probably want to use Flagellation, because everyone's like, that's a threat-led fight. So I think the chest slot for the rune is pretty interchangeable. For deep prot, I'd probably say it's interchangeable between really any one of these. I don't know how much you're going to get out of Warbringer, especially if you're just planting. So Warbringer is situational to good, we'll call it. Flagellation's pretty good. It just gives you a damage boost. That's pretty good. Blood Frenzy, you're probably not using run too much. I don't know, like, but it is a good rage generator. Like, so 3 rage for every time you deal bleed damage, or if you're expecting to deep wounds, is good. Yeah, all of these are pretty good for the warrior. As far as what I would pick, I'd probably go with Flagellation if I'm being honest. If I don't have to move, why wouldn't I just take a 25% physical bonus, right? If my rage generation is okay, I can probably still like take Flagellation. If it's not, I can see myself going Blood Frenzy. If I gotta move a lot, go Warbringer. I'm not saying Raging Blow is bad. The only reason I would say, just dependent on what you're using. So if I'm a tank, if I'm a deep prot tank and I'm using a one-hander and a shield, Raging Blow dealing 100% weapon damage, like, if you don't have a good DPS weapon, this doesn't really matter. Like, one-handers, it doesn't really matter, you know what I mean? Not saying that it's a bad rune. It's definitely a good rune, but I think Flagellation is probably better just for immediate threat, but who knows? Only time will tell. There's probably going to be a warrior player who is way better at vanilla warrior than me, going to come in here and give me the breakdown, but for me, I'd probably pick Flagellation. If I feel like I'm rage starved, I'd pick Blood Frenzy. And if I really need to move, if I'm not main tanking, if I'm off tanking, I'd pick up ads somewhere here and there, I'll pick up Warbringer. But I think Flagellation is probably the one you take. Let me see. Let me see. Proto Locos. Set bonus, but there has to be something, because being useless for. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. Like I said, you are absolutely right. And that, like Agron, I believe, said it in Crix's interview. They have a lot of tools and knobs that they can turn quite easily. So I would imagine that they can just kind of flip a switch and say, oh, Searing Pain does shadow damage now. Or Searing Pain just does true damage. It's not categorized. It does damage. It does physical. It might even it can make it do physical damage. Who knows? I don't know. But Yeah, that's an op that they could definitely flip. Let's go. I'm sorry, hands. All right. So the glove rune I think is a little bit more clear cut when it comes to deep prot tanking, which is the one-hander sword and the shield. Devastate is amazing. While you're in defensive stance and you have a shield equipped, so this you have to have both. You have to be in defensive stance and you have to have a shield equipped. Sunder Armor deals 100% weapon damage, increased by 10% per application. So if you have 5 stacks of Sunder Armor, that goes up to 150. And this is basically the Devastate that you've seen on Wrath, where it's a weapon strike that deals a percentage of your weapon damage, and it applies the Sunder Armor effect, and it does a lot of single target threat. This is the vanilla iteration. Obviously, Devastate isn't its own spell in vanilla, so they just put the Devastate effect on the Sunder Armor ability, which I think makes sense. This one is really, really good. You're probably going to see a lot of value here, so this is really, really good. Endless Rage, you generate 25% more rage from all damage you deal. This, for Deep Prot, is situational because if you're not dealing that much damage as Deep Prot, you probably won't see a lot of rage gain from this. Now, Fury Prot different. Fury Prot is different. You could probably see a good rage gain from this because if you're Fury Prot, you're doing more damage. You probably have better weapons, so on and so forth. So Fury Prot is different. Deep Prot, you probably won't use Endless Rage. Who knows? I could be wrong. Like if you have Thunder Fury and you're slapping kids with Thunder Fury by level 16, you still want to use Endless Rage. Go ahead, do your thing. Then we have Quick Strike, Single-Minded Fury, and Victory Rush. Victory Rush, I don't think you're gonna really use outside of dungeons. Like dungeons, this is a good rune, but raids, I don't know. I don't think even adds in raids, I don't think they are affected by the Victory Rush enemy that yields honor experience thing. Now, dungeon mobs definitely. Raid mobs, I don't know. But then again, in Black Fathom Depths, we're all at level 25, which I don't know if they consider an end level cap, but obviously 25 is not the end game. So this might see a lot of value because we're only at level 25. But if, as an example, we're playing Season of Discovery, you hit level 25, and let's say your experience bar goes away temporarily until the next level band, then I could see Victory Rush being okay. But I could see it not being effective because you don't have an experience bar. You can't really proc it. But if it does proc, we'll see. Only time will tell. Single-Minded Fury. This looks like a DPS / Fury proc thing to me. While dual wielding, your physical damage and movement speed are increased by 10%. This is definitely a Fury proc / dual wield thing. I mean, and at level 25, you might just be able to just Fury prot it. You might not even need a shield. Like, I don't know that it's hard to do deep dives because you don't know the damage intake. That's why I'm reserving myself from doing like a tank tier list because tank tier lists are really indicative of the incoming damage that the tank is going to face. And because I don't know all of the bosses and abilities in Black Fathom Depths, I don't really know what kind of damage is going to be, being dealt to the tank. So I don't know the use you're going to be. I don't know if you're really going to need a shield. There's a lot of defensive runes. Maybe Blizzard is gearing up for things hurting hard. I know definitely in the Crix interview, Agron and Norbold said that instead of to combat all the added power that the runes bring to each class, they have to increase the damage, the difficulty of the content that we're doing. And one thing that they said was maybe not increasing the health pool because at that point, all you're doing is just hitting a nail on with the hammer. Like you're not going anywhere. You're just working down a health meter for what I would imagine still would be simplistic mechanics, right? I don't think we're going to see retail level mechanics in vanilla. So maybe not increasing the health of the bosses, but increasing the damage done. That's one thing that they seem to both be in agreement on. Is you don't really need to create DPS races, but you still should make things scary. And what makes things scary? When things hurt. So maybe with all of these defensive runes added, you really will need them. So I personally believe that. That's why when I tank, if I'm taking new content, I always try to err on the side of caution and make sure that I can live something versus making sure I can do big numbers, especially as a tank. Like doing big numbers as a tank always feels good, but it's ultimately, you want to do big numbers, go be a DPS for real. But as far as the glove slot is concerned, I think obvious use is Devastate here, to be quite honest. You could use Endless Rage, but as a deep prot tank with the shield, I don't know how much I don't know how much rage this is going to net you when you're not really doing that much damage as a shield tank. So I think I'm going to go with Devastate here. And for the leg slot, for dungeons, I think Furious Thunder is in a class of its own. Thunderclap is now increases time between attacks by an additional 6% and can be used in any stance. So you can just Thunderclap in your defensive stance, which means it's going to get the threat modifier. You can Thunderclap in Berserker stance, which means it's going to get the crit modifier. Like, I think this is in a class of its own when it comes to dungeon tanking or when it comes to ad pickup, because you don't have to switch stances and then worry about having tactical mastery and dropping all your rage and all this, that, and the third. Like, you can do that. Frenzied Assault, I don't think is really going to play any use to shield tanking. That's for two-handed weapons. It's a nice rune, I will say that. It's a nice rune for those who opt to use two-handed weapons. You have now an option to play, but I don't think it's going to see much play as a tank. Unless you're two-hand tanking, then I guess you can use Frenzied Assault. And then Consumed by Rage enrages you and grants you 25% melee damage for 12 seconds after you exceed 80 rage. So this, I don't know about Consumed Rage. It's a nice rune, but a tank that goes up to 80 rage, I don't know. Unless you're being able to block a lot of things, or your rage generation is so high that this becomes a better rune than Furious Thunder. I don't know the usage of Consumed by Rage. So I don't want to pass my judgment on it too much, because enraging you for resource pooling isn't necessarily a bad thing. I just don't know the effectiveness of it in terms of Season of Discovery. So I'm gonna hold my thoughts on it. It doesn't look like a bad rune on paper, but I think Furious Thunder to me wins it here, only because it does increase your survivability by a little bit, because now instead of having, I think Thunderclap is a 20%, now it's 26%. So you get a little bit of a stronger debuff, and you can use it in any stance, so it's really strong. So I think Furious Thunder here, and it works both for ad tanking, for boss tanking, for dungeon tanking. Like it's you don't have to change out. So I think this is pretty good. Maybe in dungeons, Consumed by Rage is actually pretty good, because you're tanking more mobs, you're generating more rage. So maybe in dungeons this will see it. But then you're also, from pack to pack, you're also going down a lot in rage. So I don't know. Maybe not in dungeons. I don't know. I'm gonna hold judgment on that one. But I think Furious Thunder is the play here. So this is kind of what it looks like for runes in terms of what you may be using as a warrior. I don't want to set it in stone, or maybe not what you may be using, what I would choose to use in Season of Discovery. I'll call it that. And you are more than welcome to disagree with me, have a difference of opinion. I don't mind it. I welcome all comments. I want to see what you guys are thinking about when it comes to the warrior stuff. Now, in terms of talent, so warrior has always been flexible when it comes to low-level tanking stuff in their talent trees. For the most part, from like 10, or when do you start really tanking? Ragefire Chasm is technically level 13, but let's say 15. 15 is like a safe spot to really start tanking. From 15 to really like 35, 40, you could be arms tank. You could be arms tank, throw on a shield, and go to town and be fine. So again, this is where I don't know how hard the Black Fathom Depths bosses are going to be, or mobs are going to be hitting. So I'm going to err on the side of caution and go into the protection tree, and we're gonna play around with it. But I will say this: warrior is a very flexible class when it comes to their talents and their tanking. But let's just see what we can build up for the protection side. So anticipation, I don't think there's going, like I talked about this a little bit when I was talking about, I believe it was the rogue or the paladin. I think it was the day before yesterday's stream. When it comes to defense, I don't know what the defense cap is for level 25. It could just be maxing out your defense skill bar. If it is, that kind of diminishes the anticipation talent, because it's relatively easy to max out your defense, right? All you do is just take damage as you're leveling up. So I don't know the usefulness of anticipation. Shield specialization is actually pretty good. So it increases your chance to block with shields by 5%. And when you block, you have a 100% chance to generate rage when it occurs. So this is really good for dungeon tanking, for ad tanking. A little bit less of value for boss tanking, but it's still a consistent way to generate rage. So this is a pretty good talent. Next, in the second tier, we have Improved Blood Rage, which will grant you instant rage if you use Blood Rage. You have Toughness, which basically every tank class has now at this point. And then you have Iron Will, which would increase your chance to resist stuns and charms by an additional, I think 15%. No, not 15, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, that's 15% when you max it out. 1 second, let me get a swig of water. So, generally speaking, just by looking at the runes and the way I play, I probably go this route: 3 out of Toughness and 2 into Improved Rage, because once again, I'm not really sure on the damage intake and my rage generation going into a level 25 10-man. It doesn't. While gearing up, I'm gonna be taking a lot of damage. Getting my pre-raid, yeah, it's gonna be squish town. But once I have my pre-raid, once I'm pretty stable in the environments that I'm tanking in, rage generation may come. It'll be varying. So I think Improved Blood Rage kind of just puts that little band-aid, that little buffer on it. However, if things are just hitting you really hard, you just go Toughness. Max out your armor, max out your defensive power, and move on with life. But for me personally, I think I would do 2 into Improved Blood Rage, 3 into Toughness. And only because at level 25, the armor value on items isn't incredibly high like that. Even on, like, shields are probably is going to have the most. I mean, shields are always going to have the most armor, but you're going to get a much vaster portion of your armor from your shield. So I don't know. You're not. Remember, at this level, you're not able to wear plate. So I don't think you're going to get that much value out of Toughness. You probably, like, obviously to max it out is going to make your damage intake reduced. But again, I think at this point in the gearing up process and getting the pre-raid stuff processed, rage generation will probably be more of an issue than dying to a physical hit. So that's my little philosophy on that. But I have no issue with someone not speccing into Blood Rage and going into Toughness, or skipping Toughness and going into Iron Will. Iron Will is kind of a weird one. There are fear effects and stun effects in raids and dungeons, so this might see some use just depending on what we're trying to tank. But I generally don't think you really need it. But that's the second tier. We're at 19 points going into the final tier. So now we have a couple options here. You have Defiance, which is going to increase your threat generated, which is always good. You have Improved Revenge, which gives your Revenge a chance to stun mobs. And I've heard rumors that the stun effect on Revenge is an ability that already does a lot of threat, and it happens after you parry. You can only use Revenge after you parry. I think it's parry to dodge or block. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's that. But I've heard rumors that the stun chance also has an increased threat modifier, so it's kind of like when you hit Revenge and they get stunned. It's almost like hitting the mob with 2 Revenges, like 2 abilities, I'll say. I don't know how true that is. That's just what I've heard through the Warrior Grapevine, that, if you take Improved Revenge, the stun effect also has a threat modifier attached to it. Don't really know. But if it does, that makes Improved Revenge a little bit more attractive if you're off tanking. Maybe not if you're main tanking, because there's not a lot of bosses that I could think off the top of my head that are able to be stunned. So Improved Revenge, I would skip. Then the next one in this town is Improved Shield Block. So Improved Shield Block allows your shield block to generate another charge, and it increases the duration. Now, the one thing about shield block is that investing more points into it doesn't increase the charge amount. So at baseline, shield block blocks your next attack. When you take Improved Shield Block, it blocks the next 2 attacks. If I put more talent points in it, though, it won't block the next 3 attacks. It'll just increase the duration of shield block. So more often than not, you see prot warriors only putting 1 talent point in here, because the duration of shield block doesn't really matter. Like that, you don't really need to improve the duration of it. What you really care about is getting that extra attack block. So, and if the talent point doesn't increase that, who knows? They could rework it. This is all subject to change. They could rework it. They can make Improved Shield Block actually give you extra charges per talent point invested. So that could change things a lot. But as of right now, if it's working the way that it's worked in previous iterations of Vanilla, I think Improved Shield Block still just gets 1 talent point. And then we have Last Stand, which is a cooldown that you can use. Now, at this point, you don't have Shield Wall at level 25. So Last Stand really is your only cooldown as a tank in terms of Prot Warrior. And it's a pretty good one. It increases your it temporarily increases your maximum health by 30% per 20 seconds. The effect expires. After the effect expires, your health is gone, obviously. It's a 10-minute cooldown. It's pretty lengthy, but that is the nature of vanilla. Me being a cautious tank, I would take Last Stand, and then I would put my last couple of points probably into either Defiance or Deflection. Now, Defiance is pretty good because it increases your threat generated while you're in defensive stance. With the runes, though, I feel like your threat might be okay, especially with Devastate, especially with Flagellation. I think Warriors will be in a better spot, especially on single target when it comes to threat. And Furious Thunder, they'll be in a better spot for AoE tanking when it comes to threat. So I don't know how much efficacy I can give to Defiance. It's a great talent, and it's always a mainstay, but it just gets diminished in power because now we have runes that increase our threat generation. So I would say for this one, you can maybe invest 1 to 2 talent points here because we still only have up to level 25 to get to. So I would say 1 to 2 talent points here. If you're having threat issues or if you're new to Warriors, then maybe you forego improved shield block and you just go straight into Defiance to help your threat generation. But for Warriors who are comfortable and who get accustomed quickly to the rune system and their abilities and so on and so forth, you probably look at either Defiance or Last Stand with a side eye and figure out which one you don't need. If you feel like you're not in danger, you don't need Last Stand, put that extra point into Defiance or put it elsewhere. I think Last Stand is just really good. It's a good safety button, right? And again, tanks in general are live and die by the damage and tick that they're taking. And if you don't, and there's a difference between a tank who has a cooldown versus a tank who doesn't have a cooldown. So, I like to get Last Stand. It's not that long of a cooldown. This is doomer thinking, but on every wipe, it should be up by the time you get back to the boss, rebuff, reflash, refood, whatever have you. It should be back up, or at least back up at the point where you needed it before. So I would pick Last Stand and then go 2 into Defiance. Or if I feel like I don't really need that extra charge and improved shield block, you can even skip shield block and just go 3 out of 5. But I think the extra block charge is pretty good. So I would go out of that. I would do 2 out of 5. And then for my last 2 remaining talent points, to me, it's either Deflection, Cruelty, or Heroic Strike. Me being a defensive boy, I would do Deflection. Whoop, that's too many points. Deflection, increase your parry chance by 2%. A little bit more avoidance, a little bit more safety. You got it. This is kind of a general protection build for level 25, dependent on how hard things are hitting in Black Fathom Depths. If things aren't hitting that hard, you might not even need to go into the protection tree. However, I got a sneaking suspicion based on what Agron and Nora said and based on a lot of the defensive runes that they put across different classes that things are going to get hit. You're going to be getting hit pretty decently hard. So you're probably going to need some defensive plays here. So I like to always err on the side of defense. This is what I got. Now, when it comes to arms tanking, let's clear some of this stuff out. Arms tanking, which is a thing, because you can definitely do it. I've done it, on my hardcore run. I've done it when I attempted to play vanilla back in 2020. It's a thing. For arms tanking, I think, once again, because we kind of got a soft confirmation on things being harder, hitting harder, I think Deflection is the no-brainer here. I think you go 5 out of 5 Deflection. Improved Charge, I would say you could go. However, we do have a lot more rage. Like, instead of Improved Charge, I would maybe switch out a rune for if you need the extra rage. And especially if you're not using Warbringer, I don't know how much use you get out of Improved Charge. But Tactical Mastery is another one that, now that we have a lot of runes that don't really have stance requirements to them. Like Furious Thunder doesn't have a stance requirement. Devastate does. So once you're in defensive stance and have a shield equipped, your Sunder Armor won't do this effect unless those 2 requirements are in lock. So Devastate is one of the only ones that I think has a stance attached to being able to use it. With that being said, I don't know how frequently you're going to need to swap out of stances, especially if you're using the Devastate one. So Tactical Mastery also gets a little bit of a side eye, but that kind of gets erased when you look at Anger Management, because Anger Management is probably still going to operate the same way that it does on vanilla servers, where the tooltip says increase the time required for your rage to decay out of combat by 30%. But what that really means is it causes you to, I think, generate one rage like every 3 seconds or every 5 seconds. That's really what this talent does. It makes you generate like one rage every couple of seconds. So Tactical Mastery being the catalyst to get Anger Management kind of makes Tactical Mastery a strong talent choice, in my opinion. So anyway, you got Deflection, you got Tactical Mastery, you got Anger Management, you got 5 points left to spend. You can go a couple of ways here. You can put those 5 points in Shield Specialization, which increases your block chance and increases your rage generation when you block. Now, if you're not using a shield and you're just trying to quote unquote Death Knight tank it and just do a two-handed job, then you probably don't need Shield Specialization, right? Even if you're using a macro to like fast swap to a one-hander and a shield to like maybe get off a shield block or maybe get off a shield bash to interrupt something. If the majority of the time you're using a two-handed tank, you probably don't need Shield Specialization. However, again, because of what Agron and Nora said, with mobs hitting harder, I would recommend you probably put your last 5 points in here just to increase your block chance, increase your defensive power. But only time will tell how much damage we're going to be taking. So this sub-spec comes with an asterisk. We don't know if we're going to need this or not yet. Now, if you don't need it, then you can obviously go into Cruelty, which increases your crit chance by 5%. This was always a pretty good talent in and of itself. When I was leveling a warrior, I always started out with getting Cruelty first and then going into the arms tree. So that was always a talent choice you could do. However, if you don't want to get the 5% crit because you feel like there's other things in the arms tree that you could take, let me just reset this. You could go Rend and Deep Wounds. And I say that because, I put too many talent points here. There we go. You could go Rend and Deep Wounds because there is not this one. There is a rune that, here it is, Blood Frenzy. Each time you do bleed damage, you generate 3 rage. Now, Rend and Deep Wounds are 2 separate bleed effects. So Rend can generate your 3 rage. Deep Wounds can generate your 3 rage. If you're feeling like you're rage starved, you can go a Flagellation build. Not Flagellation build, I'm sorry. You can go let me just switch it, because I'll just keep saying Flagellation. You'll go a Blood Frenzy build, and you'll be able to use Blood Frenzy and kind of like a bleed rage builder. Like, one thing that warriors kind of, I don't want to say faltered at, but it was always like a thing with warriors, is that if they're not actively tanking, it was hard for them to generate threat. So if there's a tank swap, or if there's multiple tank swaps in Black Fathom Depths, once your rage is gone, it was always kind of tough to generate rage again. Blood Frenzy Blood Frenzy plus the Rend Deep Wounds build kind of alleviates that, because you can still put up Rend, you can still proc Deep Wounds and generate rage as an off tank, while you're waiting for that tank swap. And while you're actively tanking, this will just feed into your rage. So Blood Frenzy might be more favored upon if you're arms tanking. Pardon me. So you can look at it that way. And that would bring us to the requirement of level 25. This would kind of be the talent point that you build up with. Now, when it comes to Fury tanking, before I get into Fury, let me just close out arms real quick by saying I want to make sure I'm understood that all of this is a placeholder until we see the damage intake. I would imagine that because Blizzard added 3 new tanks and they're planning to increase the damage, that arms tanking might go to the wayside. Obviously, there are going to be great players and great guilds out there who can make arms tanking work, who can make the bleed rage generator thing work. I'm not saying no one's ever going to do it. I don't know if it's just going to be favorable for the general warrior, for the common man warrior, right? Even for me, like, I don't know how far I would get as an arms tank using this build, because I'm not a masterful warrior yet. Like, there's still things that I need to think about when I'm warrior tanking in vanilla. So that being said, I think it's possible to do arms tanking. I think if you follow a setup like this, similar to this, maybe if you lean more into the prot tree, you can tank without issue as long as you're in defensive stance. I would say you probably have to think about a different hands rune, because this requires you to be in defensive stance and use and have a shield equipped, which means you couldn't use a two-hander, which means you probably want to do something else. But I feel like if that's the case, like I feel like Devastate is just such a good rune that it might be worth it just to take that hit and not two-hand tank and just, one-hand shield tank, because I've done that too in vanilla and hardcore. I've tanked with a two-hander, I've tanked with the Whirlwind Axe, or I've tanked with just a one-hand and shield. So I feel like Devastate is too good a rune to go up on just because you want a two-hand tank. Just my opinion. But that's really it. When it comes to Fury tanking, I feel like 25, my personal opinion, I feel like 25 is a little too early to really get into Fury tanking. I think Fury, especially earlier in the tree, is really more so setting you up for doing damage versus tanking. Not to say that you couldn't do it, but in a raid, I don't know how comfortable I would feel being a Fury tank. Even just looking at the talents, like a lot of the tanking talents are in the prot and the arms tree. Like you do get cool things like booming voice to increase the duration and area effect of your shouts. You do get improved demo shout for an increased physical damage reduction on demo shout. You do get blood craze when you get crit. You generate a little bit of health over time. Like there are little things, but most of the defensive talents are in the prot and the arms tree. So I don't know how far you would get as going, like investing the majority of your talent points at level 25 into Fury, to be quite honest with you. I think Cruelty is arguably the best talent early on for the Fury tree, like for the first 3 tiers. I feel like Cruelty is the best talent, and it's the first tier, so you can get Cruelty regardless, like whether you're prot or whether you're armed. So if you have access to the arguably the best Fury talent early on, and you still get the defensive power of being majority prot or majority arms, is there really a reason to go deeper into Fury? In my opinion, not so much. If there's other warriors out there who can make a case for this, please let me know. Put it in the comments below. Maybe I overlooked something. Maybe I'm overlooking a certain item / talent correlation between early Fury. So I could be 100% wrong, but in me personally, just looking at it at maybe a little bit more than face value and just looking at tanking experience, I don't think there's much in the early Fury tree that you would want to tank with, right? So that's just my opinion. Especially if you're using the Devastate rune, you wouldn't be able to dual wield. You'd have to have a shield equipped. Like, so you could change Devastate and you could get Quick Strike. You can get Single-Minded Fury, increasing your physical damage and movement speed while dual wielding. Those are things. These are options. Do I think Single-Minded Fury will generate more threat than Devastate? No, I don't think so, to be quite honest with you. I think, now unless you have some great weapons, right? Unless you got the Blizzard Stimulus package and you have, two cruel barbs and you have, a Hand of Justice and you're good, like you have some excellent gear, then maybe Single-Minded Fury would generate more threat than Devastate. And then you could go deep into Fury and you could be in defensive stance and you could tank. Me personally, I don't think that's the case. I think Devastate's the best threat generator for the hand rune slot. And that leads me to believe that Fury tanking at 25, while maybe possible, is probably not as effective as protection tanking or arms tanking. So I'm not going to invest too much talent points in here. All right, I think that cleans up Warrior. We talked about a lot with Warrior because Warrior is just so flexible as a tank early on that I think there was just a lot to cover. So I think it's cool that I think it's now cool to go into the Druid. I'm just going to take a swig of water here. And I said I wouldn't ramble. It's been 44 minutes, and I feel like I was rambling. I'm trying to get my thoughts across, guys. Please bear with me. All right, now let's go into the Druid. And Druid got a lot of interesting runes. So let's start it off. Let's kick it off. So the chest rune, you have Fury Storm Rage, which is really more for boomkins. You have Living Seed, you have Survival of the Fittest, and you have Wild Strikes. So as a Feral Druid, The two combating runes for this slot is going to be Survival of the Fittest and Wild Strikes. Survival of the Fittest gives you crit immunity, so immediately puts you at defense cap. It reduces all damage taken by 10% and an additional 10% if you're in bear form or dire bear form. So you get a 20% DR. This is not just physical damage. This is all damage. So a 20% DR while in bear form. We all know bear form have astronomical armor modifiers. And you get a crit immunity. So this is like the giga survival rune. This is really a good rune if things are hitting hard. And it leads me to believe that at least for boss tanking, for bosses that primarily do physical damage, Druid is probably going to be the best one, to be quite honest with you. And I don't think it's going to be close. Maybe Metamorphosis Warlock is close because Meta gives you a 500% armor modifier, but to my knowledge, that rune doesn't give you, and I guess we could check it real quick before I get into the talent tree. That rune doesn't give you any physical damage reduction. Yeah, it gives you the armor, it gives you the crit immunity, and increases your threat. It increases mana gain from life tap, but it doesn't give you a damage reduction. And having a 20% damage reduction is pretty strong, even at low levels, in my opinion. So, Survival of the Fittest is a really powerful defensive rune. However, you have Wild Strikes also looking you in the face. While you're in cat form, bear form, or dire bear form, party members within 20 yards gain an increased combat ferocity. Each melee hit has a 20% chance of granting the attacker an extra 20% additional attack power hit. No effect if the party member is already benefiting from Wind Fury Totem. Basically, you get a Wind Fury aura is basically what Wild Strikes is. While you're in bear form or one of your bear forms or cat form, anyone within your party has a chance to proc an extra attack. That's really, really good. So this is where I was talking about in the Warrior Tree, where you kind of have to gauge the content that you're doing. If you're not getting hit incredibly hard, you can, put some investment into getting Wild Strikes and increasing your group's DPS. If bosses are slapping you, which I feel like they will be, especially as you're gearing up, as you're getting that pre-raid stuff, pardon me, Survival of the Fittest is the easy take. In my opinion, these runes are going to be interchangeable. You're probably not going to always use Survival of the Fittest unless you're just 90% main tanking. And you're probably not going to always use Wild Strikes. But I think these runes are definitely interchangeable. I will say this, for the purposes of this stream and for the VOD, for people watching back, I'm not putting any shade on Wild Strike, but I think for the gearing up process, Survival of the Fittest is the better one. Because Wild Strike is great, but if you're dying, no one's getting your aura, all right? Like if you're dying as a tank, no one's getting this aura, so it doesn't really matter if you have a Wind Fury aura or not. If you're dead, no one gets it. So I think for the gearing up process, for the learning process, for progression process, if you're main tanking, Survival of the Fittest is the better rune. If you're not main tanking, Wild Strikes is probably the better pick. If you just have to taunt occasionally or pick up an ad occasionally, Wild Strikes is the better pick. For a fact. That's just my opinion on that. But I'm going to pick, because I'm going to probably operate. I always think in the mindset that I'm going to try to operate as a main tank. I'm not trying to say I have an ego or anything. Like, I don't care. I can main tank, I can off tank. I can be taunt boy. Just taunt this thing when it comes out, tank for 30 seconds and go back to DPS. I don't care. But I'm trying to operate with the mindset of main tanking. And as a main tank, you probably want Survival of the Fittest. Next, for the hand slot, we have another conflicting thing. So we have Lacerate, we have Mangle, and we have Sunfire. So Sunfire, to me, it doesn't explicitly say this, but let's just read it real quick. So it burns the enemy. So it's basically a nature version of Moonfire. But the second part, in addition, while in bear form, cat form, or dire bear form, your Moonfire is replaced with Sunfire. This spell benefits and triggers from all effects associated with Moonfire. But it doesn't say that you can use it while in those animal forms. So that is pretty interesting to me, because if you've never played like retail, and this has been a thing for a long time, since like the Lunar Inspiration talent, I think that talent was in WoD. But being able to use Moonfire in your cat and bear form has been a thing for quite some time if you haven't played retail. So it's interesting to see that they kind of bring that notion to vanilla. I don't know how much use you get out of this, but then again, at level 25, you can't get to Fairy Fire, so you don't really have a range spender. So I guess that's kind of what you want to use when you're trying to pick up things at range. But again, it doesn't explicitly say that you can use Sunfire in your animal forms, but I feel like it's weird that they would include that in the tooltip if you couldn't. So I'm going to lean on the side that you probably can use this ability in your animal forms, even though it doesn't say it, but it includes those forms in the tooltip. But anyway, I don't think this is a cool pick for OTs. I don't think this is a main tank rune. I think the other ones are pretty main tankish. And let's look at the first one, Lacerate. So Lacerate got introduced in TBC. It's basically just a stacking bleed. It does a certain amount of damage plus weapon damage per application. And it causes a high amount of threat, stacks up to 5 times. And it's a really good consistent rage generator. Especially when you're not tanking, when you have to keep up above certain DPS and threat. Now, generally speaking, in vanilla, Druids didn't really have that problem anyway, right? Because Maul did so much threat, and Druids can generate rage while not tanking. That was like one of the most evident strengths about a Druid tank versus a Warrior tank is that Druids they could generate their own rage, so they really didn't have a problem staying above other DPS when it came to fights like Patchwork, where he's attacking the top 3 threat people aside from your main tank. Druids didn't have a problem because, just hit them all. But now they have Lacerate to kind of fuel that rage generation. And Druids were already the best single target tanks from the olden, I don't want to say olden days, from pre-season of Discovery. Like, they were always better at single target threat than Warriors were. Now that gap has closed a little bit. Warriors got some different tools, but so do Druids. So Lacerate is one that you could use. Mangle, though, was always the big nuke. Like, in Burning Crusade, I mained a Feral Druid tank, and Mangle, especially when it crit, might as well been a taunt. Like, once Mangle crit, there was no, that mob was on you. Whatever you hit, it was on you. It was on you, and there was no going back. So having Mangle and Lacerate on the same slot seems a little troll to me, especially when both kind of do the same thing, in my opinion. But I think I feel like these are interchangeable. I feel like the only way you change out of Lacerate or Mangle is that if you don't have a Feral Druid. If you're the only Feral Druid and you're trying to give everyone the bleed effect because you have Warriors in your group, I don't think, do Rogues have a bleed? Do they have a Rupture? I don't know if they have Rupture in vanilla. Somebody will let me know. I'm sure somebody will let me know. I don't know if they have Rupture in vanilla, but if they do, it'll increase Rupture damage. There's Deep Wounds. There's other bleed effects. I think Hunters have one too. They have like a piercing shots one in the marksman tree. So if you're wanting to give the bleed debuff and you want a really big single target threat increase, Mangle is the one to go with, for a fact. I can speak from experience on how much threat even when it doesn't crit, how much threat Mangle produces. And I think also Mangle, because it doesn't have a form. It doesn't have a form requirement. You don't have to be in bear or cat form. I think this is interchangeable. I think this is just Mangle. You can use it in bear or cat form. This is probably a better rune if you're flexing. This is probably the rune that you take if you're not a full-time bear tank. You're just you're really a DPS, but in times that you need that extra tank, or in times that you need your guild needs a person to pick up a mob, and you need to go into bear, but you're primarily DPSing. Mangle's the one that you take because it also increases damage from shred. So now you have that modifier for when you're actually doing DPS. If you're primarily a bear tank, I don't know, man. If you're primarily a bear tank, the correct answer should be Lacerate, especially if there's another Feral Druid in the party. However, Mangle, just from me using it in the past, has served me very well. I will say that. So, dependent on your role as a Druid tank, these two are interchangeable. As far as which one deals more threat, over time, Lacerate might deal more threat, and I don't know the threat modifier for Lacerate. I guess we can kind of math it out real quick. So it does bleed damage over 15 seconds plus 20% per application. So it's 5 times, so that's 100% weapon damage versus 160% normal damage. So normal damage versus weapon damage, this will scale better if you have a good weapon. If you're not, just stuck with a crowd pummeler. This, again, is not indicative of weapons, but this is better for flexing Druids. So I would say as a main tank bear, you probably pick Lacerate. because you still have Maul. Maul was basically what Mango was in vanilla. Maul was the big threat generator. So you still have Maul. So if you have Maul on Lacerate, you probably don't need Mango, especially because those two buttons can conflict, right? So Lacerate and Maul probably will do you enough justice for threat. So you probably don't need Mango. If you're a flexing druid, like I said, if you're DPS and tank, Mango's probably the one to go with. So I'm gonna select Lacerate for here. And for the leg slot, I don't really think it's an option. I think it's pretty clear cut. I think you take Skull Bash, to be honest with you. Now, not having raided in vanilla, I don't know how many raid interrupts there are, and I don't know how many interrupts there are going to be in the raid version of Black Fathom Depths. I know there's a lot of interrupts in dungeons, so Skull Bash really helps, and it's a little mini charge, right? It charges you 13 yards. 13 yards is a bigger distance than what you might think, right? So think about it like that. 13 yards is basically half the distance of a warrior charge, because the charge threshold is between 8 and 30 or 8 and 25. So having 13 yards is basically in that midpoint. So I think it's Skull Bash. Now, I did speak with a couple of druids who played, and they made the case for Life Bloom. And I said, Life Bloom? What do you mean? Like, why would I ever get Life Bloom? Well, if you're off tanking and you're waiting for a taunt and something comes out and you want to jump out of bear form and use your mana pool, because remember, in bear form, you're not using mana, you're using rage. So your mana pool is probably just sitting there full. You can toss out a Life Bloom and help people out. That's what I was heard. And this seems to be a common practice for druids. Jumping out of your bear form when you're not tanking if you don't need to generate secondary threat, and throwing out some utility spells, throwing out a rejuve, throwing out, a regrowth, and now throwing out a Life Bloom. So I've heard cases made for Life Bloom. I just wasn't aware of that. I was ignorant to the fact that druids really jumped out of form to heal like that when they're off tanking. Only time will tell. We'll see if this actually becomes if that style of play gets entered into Season of Discovery. But I just figured I'd mention here because I didn't want to say there's no case for Life Bloom, but apparently there is. And it seems like it operates the same way that we've seen Life Bloom operate in Wrath and in future iterations. It reduces the global cooldown of Rejuvenation and Life Bloom spells by half a second, which is actually really good. And Life Bloom heals the target for over 7 seconds. When it completes its duration or is dispelled, it instantly heals the target, and the druid gains half the mana cost. So it's not even that big of a mana investment, and it can stack 3 times. So yeah, I could see play for Life Bloom if you're off tanking. You're waiting for the taunt, an ability comes out, you need to throw a quick Life Bloom on the person who is tanking, or throw a quick Life Bloom out just to help the healers out. I could see it, or even Life Bloom yourself real quick. Like you can Life Bloom yourself, throw it on yourself right before a taunt, go back into bear form and taunt. That's a move too. I've done that before. I've made macros where I've came out of bear form, hit bark skin, waited for the GCD to come back up, and right back into bear form. So Life Bloom does have some merit. So again, I'm not sure how much use you're going to get out of interrupting in raids, but if there is interrupts, Skull Bash is the easy no-brainer, but there is merit for Life Bloom. I will say that. Star Search and Savage Roar, I don't think there's merit for. Especially because Savage Roar requires you to be in cat form. Now, if you're a flex tank, if you're really a DPS, but you're tanking when necessary, Savage Roar could be the play here. I would also argue that if you're flexing, Skull Bash could also be the play here, because if you're a DPS for real, you're probably going to need to interrupt too. So, as a flex druid, these two are interchangeable. As a primary bear druid, Skull Bash and Life Bloom are interchangeable. So keep that in mind. I don't really see too much merit from Star Surge. I could be wrong. I was wrong about Life Bloom, so I could be wrong about Star Surge, but I don't see the merit here, so I would pick either Skull Bash or Life Bloom. Once we know what Black Fathom Depths holds, if there's no interrupts in Black Fathom Depths or no meaningful interrupts in Black Fathom Depths, just pick Life Bloom, to be quite honest with you. Pick Life Bloom. You have that little bit of utility that druids are known for, and you move on. If there are interrupts, or if there's a lot of trash with interrupts, because in vanilla and in TBC, we all know trash is some of the hardest parts in raids, Skull Bash makes your life that much easier. All right, going into the talents. So druids was also another one that kind of has some talent flexibility. I don't feel like they have as much flexibility as warriors when it came to it, but they still got some pretty neat talents in each tree. A little bit less on the balance side, more on the Pharaoh, more on the resto side. So I would say definitely if you're operating as a main tank, you definitely want ferocity. I don't think you take feral aggression because even with max talent point investment, it's only just as good as I think a base demo shout, and I feel like that would carry over even at level 25. So you really don't need to put feral aggression in. If you don't have your warrior, maybe, and you're getting really hit really hard, maybe, but I don't think you need feral aggression. So I think reducing the cost of your abilities takes precedence over turning a weak debuff into a slightly less weak debuff. Going into the secondary side, you have Feral Instinct, which is going to increase your threat generated in bear form by 3%. And like we don't really care about the stealth detection thing. You have Brutal Impact, increases the duration on stuns, which is kind of meh. And then you have Thick Hide, which increases your armor contribution from items by an additional percentage. So Feral Instinct is kind of like the Defiance version. It's kind of like Defiance for Feral Druid. Pardon me. Let me just take a swig of water. Sorry, guys. Been talking for a little bit. Feral Instinct will make your threat generation better. And threat is already something Druids are good at. So, again, you kind of look at this as an as-needed talent. I think as a Druid, you're more than likely going to be assigned to single target things. Like, no one's going to say, like, as an example, on Onyxia, I don't really think you assign the Druid to go pick up the whelps. I'm going to be real. Like, obviously, there are guilds that have done that, and there are Druid tanks that have no problem doing that with a little bit of help. Like, they put down the sapper. They, tell DPS don't attack. Let me tab swipe for a little bit. Let me spam demo roar. Druids can make it work, right? And Feral Instincts will make all of those instances that much better. In Black Fathom Depths, I don't really know how much efficacy Feral Instinct is going to get because Druids are already good at threat. So when it comes to the second tier talents, just as a safety net, you could probably put 2 talent points in here just to increase your threat generated by 6% while in your bear form. And you can put the other 3 into Thick Hide. Now these two pardon me. These 2 points, what am I stuttering here? Jesus Christ. The numbers are interchangeable. You can put 2 points into Thick Hide and 3 points into Feral Instinct. You can put all of it, if you just want to be a threat monster, into Feral Instinct, because at level 25, even at its base, even without Thick Hide, bear form still is a really big armor modifier. So you might say, hey, I might not need Thick Hide. But again, because we've got so many warnings and so many small little runes that increase armor, it makes me feel like taking hits is going to become precedent. So that's why I would say, if you want the best of both worlds, put 2 here, put 3 here, call it a day. And where we're at? We're at 19. So we got about 6 points left to go with. And I think for the most part, Feline Swiftness isn't really used because it only works for your cat form while you're outdoors, and it only increases the dodge while in cat form. So Feline Swiftness kind of gets overlooked here. Feral Charge, however, does not. Feral Charge is a really good ability. So not only is it like the Warrior Charge where you charge something, you get an immediate gap closer for an enemy, it interrupts them and it immobilizes them. So they get rooted for a short duration, which can be really strong, especially for ad pickups. Like once you charge something, if they don't resist it, if it doesn't miss, if they get charged, they're not going anywhere for 4 seconds, which means you have that much more time to generate some immediate threat on it before DPS immediately switch to it, like so on and so forth. Like Feral Charge is just a really good talent in and of itself. And then we have Sharpened Claws. I think you just max this one out. Increasing your critical strike chance while in bear form by 6% is basically a threat generator increase. And then we have 2 talent points left. Now, you can invest those last 2 into Thick Hide. You can invest those last 2 into Feral Instinct. You could even go into the Fury Tree. And I think this is the better way to do this. So Furor is a talent in the Restos tree that gives you a 40% chance to generate 10 rage when you shapeshift into your bear form or dire bear form. Now, generally at max level, you would max this one out because what this does is before a fight starts, it allows you to shift out of and into bear form and immediately have 10 rage before the fight starts, so you don't start dry. This is a really strong talent, and honestly, I would say there's an argument to put let's just reset this real quick. There's an argument to put 5 talent points in here and just always have 10 rage when you start a fight. There's arguments for that. Now, obviously, that comes with some sacrifices. What I sacrificed was Sharpened Claws, which you're sacrificing 6% crit. And you kind of just got to pick your poison here. Do I need the crit more than I need the immediate rage? Who knows? Only time will tell to see what we got. Improve rage, I didn't know. I don't think you really need anything else. Improve rage is not a bad talent, but I think druids are good enough at generating rage on their own that improve rage. I wouldn't sacrifice any more points out of the feral combat tree to get improve rage. Obviously, there are going to be builds that do this. I'm not saying this is the end all be all. This is just what I'm comfortable with as a druid tank, or as a former druid tank, I should say. So there's an argument to go max fury, always be able to get 10 rage and move on with life. I think there's an argument just to do 2 out of 4 and kind of play the shift shuffle game. If you want more consistent results, if you feel like, you know what, it's not, if I'm at 40%, then you know what, that's just not really worth it. I don't want to have a chance to get rage, because at that point you're just shifting, wasting mana if you're not getting that rage. Then you can always just go into improve Mark of the Wild and make your Mark of the Wild a little bit more powerful. If you have a resto druid or other druids in your party who already have this talent, then obviously you don't really need this. But that just comes with planning. You kind of got to plan around what group composition you're going to be a part of. If there are no other druids in your party, then hey, improve Mark of the Wild might be something that gives your party a little bit of a bigger boost. If you want to go full defensive, then you just put those last 2 points into Thick Hide and get an extra armor modifier to help increase your survivability, because that's what druids do the most. They take physical. That's what druids do the best. They take physical hits the best, and if things are hitting really, really hard, having Thick Hide is going to be a boon rather than a detriment. And then when it comes to the balance tree, so the balance tree does have natural weapons, which increases the damage you deal with physical attacks in all forms by 2%, stacking 5 times. This is a pretty good talent. So let me just reset real quick. Let's say you actually wanted this, because I want to stress at its base, especially when you have runes assisting you, at its base, without any talent point investment into Feral, Bear form and the bear abilities are really strong. Maul is still a really strong ability. Bear form is still a really strong form. So if you're looking at Furor, or you're looking at improved in rage, and you're looking at natural weapons and saying, you know what, I really could use those, you can. Like, you can go here, you can get Nature's Grasp, you can max it out, you can get natural weapons, and you still have enough talent points to reduce the cost of your Maul, and you can now pick between getting a little bit more armor increase or threat generation. So now you have Feral Instincts, which is increasing your threat by 3%. You have all damage you're dealing increased by 10%, and you still have the rage cost reduction on Maul. This could be a very, very solid build for early tanking for the level 25 cap as well. It just depends on the type of damage we're taking. So if we need the extra armor, if we need to go fully into feral combat, and just to max out Thick Hide, that might be a thing. The only detriment here is not having feral charge. I think feral charge is really, really strong. So not having it, can feel like, once you have it and then you don't have it, you'll immediately feel like, oh man, I'm missing something here. So I think that is definitely something that you might want to consider your options on weighing. Is natural weapons worth not having feral charge? But then you could also say, all right, I don't need feral instincts. If I don't have enough points to get to feral charge, then I might want to go Omen of Clarity. Now, Omen of Clarity is a buff that you put on yourself. Oh, let me go back to it. Sorry. It's a buff that druids put on themselves, and each time the druid's melee attacks has a chance for them to enter the clear casting effect, reducing the rage cost of your next ability by 100%, last 10 minutes. This can be a decent supplement for not having feral charge. It may not be replacing feral charge completely, but it at least is a nice supplement to have a chance to have like free mauls. Imagine that, like, especially if you get back-to-back procs, like back-to-back procs of free mauls or free lacerate applications. Like, the power of Omen of Clarity shouldn't be undermined. So that is a trade-off that you can see here. Do I want the chance to get free mauls, or do I want a good gap closer with an interrupt built in, with a root and interrupt built in? These are the things that you kind of got to weigh when you're thinking about being a Feral Druid. But like I said, I think Druid just has a lot of flexibility within the talents. I know in the beginning I said maybe not so much in the balance tree, but I honestly kind of forgot that they had natural weapons and Omen of Clarity, so I want to correct my mistake in there. Other than that, though, there's multiple talent builds you can do at the level 25 bracket for Druid. Just to finish it off here, I'll say for main tanking, for just taking the least amount of damage that you can and gearing up process, like getting the pre-raid stuff, I would go 5 out of 5 ferocity, 5 out of 5 thick hide, 1 into feral charge, and then you could put 2 into feral instinct and then 3 into sharpened claws. That'll net you everything that you need. You get the threat increase, you get the reduced cost on maul, you get max armor value, you get the charge, and you get 6% increased crit. This is pretty much what I would use if I'm primarily boss / main tanking as a Druid. If I'm not, then you can go something like the Nature's Grasp natural weapons build, where you take natural weapons. You can get maul. You can get ferocity here to reduce your cost on maul, and then you have a choice. Like I said, you have a choice of getting Omen of Clarity. You have a choice of getting more armor, more threat, longer duration bash. But I think probably since you're only investing 1 talent point and you're only getting, a fifth of the power from these talents, I think you just get Omen of Clarity, because Omen of Clarity is going to really drive your threat. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I think Omen of Clarity is the one that you take. And Omen of Clarity is really good when you're off tanking, when you're not actually fighting the boss and you're still generating free mauls and free ability cost. Even in the cat form, free ability cost, like Omen of Clarity is just good. So I think this is more so, this is like a threat tank / off tank build. And then the first build that I said, the 5 out of 5 thick hide, 2 out of 5 feral instinct, sharpened claws, and feral charge, that's more of like a main tank build, right? So keep that in mind. But I think that's really it for when it comes to the Feral Druid and the Warrior. Both of them have interchangeable talents. Both of them have interchangeable runes, and we will see what mainstay builds and what mainstay runes are going to be used. Even though I feel like when it comes to runes, especially for the Druid, because there's a lot of important runes that share slots, I feel like a lot of them are going to be interchangeable for a Druid. I think I'm going to do maybe not tomorrow. I don't know when. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll probably schedule it. Maybe I'll put it in video form and just put it out. But I want to do a comparison now that we've reviewed all of the tanks that's coming into Season of Discovery. I want to do a comparison for all of the tanks, and I kind of want to portion it out and kind of categorize it as you have the block tanks, which is the Warriors, the Paladins, the Shamans. You have the armor tanks, the big armor / threat tanks, which is the Meta Warlocks, the Druids. And I put Rogue in a class of its own because I think that's really the avoidance tank. And I think it's in a class of its own because it primarily mitigates damage by not taking it. Now, obviously, all tanks are going to have some form of dodge and parry and stuff like that. But rogues really kind of cement themselves into that style. So I think it'd be an interesting video or stream to kind of compare the three. And I know I said it in my rogue stream. I'll just briefly go back to it real quick. Where is it? It's just a flesh wound, main gosh, and blade dance. So I briefly said it in my rogue stream. I just kind of want to go through it real quick here. No, I said it in my rogue stream. I want to briefly say it here. So really quick, if you look at just the flesh wound, it reduces all damage. It reduces 20% physical damage taken while blade dance is active. Blade dance is your leg rune. So if you use max combo points, while you have 10% parry, you will also take 20% less physical damage, right? Main gosh instantly strikes with your offhand, dealing offhand weapon damage, and increases your parry chance by 10% for 10 seconds. So if you get 10% here, you get 10% from blade dance, you get 20% chance to parry, plus a 20% physical damage reduction, and obviously Just a Flesh Wound gives you the crit immunity and gives you access to a taunt. Note that Just a Flesh Wound doesn't have a health increase. It doesn't have a health increase like what you get from Way of the Earth on the Shamans. It doesn't have an armor increase. It does have the physical damage reduction, which is kind of like an armor increase, but because rogues wear leather and they never wear mail and they don't have armor modifiers, right? So even if you wear something with bonus armor on it, like a lot of druids wear, like you'll see an item with their armor, the numbers, the value will be green. That's like bonus. That means it has bonus armor on it. Rogues don't have, or as of right now, like the level 25 bracket, rogues don't have something that gives them bonus armor. They don't have a toughness talent that increases armor contribution. They don't have a thick hide. They don't have a stance that increases armor value. They don't have any of that. They just have 20% physical damage reduction while Blade Dance is active. And that's what led me to say I think that this rune at some point might get buffed. Now, it might not, because I might just be underestimating the amount of avoidance a rogue will be able to produce, right? If you have a 20% parry chance on top of having access to evasion, you might not even need extra armor or extra stamina. Who knows? But in my case, I'm thinking about, okay, what happens if a boss does magic damage? What happens if you're tanking something that does a breath attack? Just a Flesh Wound isn't going to protect you from that. Parry and dodge isn't going to protect you from that. So yeah, Just a Flesh Wound won't allow you to be crit from it. But if you're already working with, something that doesn't have a lot of armor, something that doesn't get a health modifier or a flat damage modifier, or a flat DR modifier, I feel like rogues are kind of the odd man out, and I feel like they might buff Just a Flesh Wound. I could be completely wrong, and like I said, I could be severely underestimating the power of Main Gosh and Blade Dance and some of the talents that I went over yesterday. But I feel like for true damage, for magic damage, for damage that's just not avoided, rogues are kind of in a weird spot. I feel like for bosses that just primarily do auto attack damage, like I guess Patrick is the easiest example. Like on a fight like Patrick, rogues is probably amazing. It's never going to take damage. It's never going to take damage. It's always going to parry things. It's always going to be able to proc repost because it's parrying a lot of stuff. Like rogues going to be amazing. I just don't know how good they're going to be when it comes to magic damage. And maybe that's what they want the weak. Maybe every tank needs a weakness, and that's what they want the weakness of the rogue to be. So who knows? Only time will tell. I just figured I wanted to talk about that a little bit because at some point I'm going to do a tank comparison. So that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about. But I've taken up a lot of your time, guys. I'm glad I got to do the warrior and druid tank discussion, and I look forward to doing the tank comparison overall. But as always, thank you for joining me. If you catch me on the view, thank you guys. I appreciate it. You've been great. I've been Soul, and I'm out. Peace.